If you can hear some music right now, it's because my neighbors just like to play their music really, really loud. And hopefully the camera doesn't pick it up. And hopefully if the camera is picking it up, it's not copyrighted music. Hopefully it's all royalty free, but yeah, we'll see. Hi, I'm poet and writer Kaye Spivey. I wanted to do something a little bit indulgent. I've been talking with a friend about indulgent things. Writing is indulgent. The best writing is indulgent. So here's the thing. This year I was gonna work on some other stories. I was gonna work on my study abroad story, and I was gonna work on my moon painting story. Yes, Zuko? And like, I am working on them, I promise. I am working on them, but the thing is, Circuit is just like in the back of my mind constantly. It keeps popping in and being like, well, but what about this? Well, but what if we tried this thing? Well, what if we did this instead? I'm trying to come to terms with the fact that I really need to shelve Circuit for now. Like, it's not getting the response I want. I've worked on it for 7 years now, and I really just need to put it aside, really work on these other stories, and maybe come back to it later. But like, I'm having a hard time. It's like I believe in this story so much. Like, I know Circuit can be such a good story, like it can do so much, and it clearly isn't there yet. Like, clearly it's not getting the response I wanted. And then Circuit just pops up, you know, like as I'm falling asleep, and is like, hey, but what if we changed this thing? What if we did this other thing? What if we just slightly tweaked this and like changed this character just a little bit? And I'm like, you're right, that sounds so good. That sounds amazing. That sounds like a great idea. But that's not where I need to be right now in my headspace. And so what I want to do today is something terribly self-indulgent. I'm just gonna read you a part from the book that I really like. I liked writing it. I like reading it back over. I'm proud of myself for it. I'm just gonna read it. And I'm gonna read it to you just without context. It comes from what, like halfway through? Almost halfway through. It's like the section before the big midpoint turn. Totally without context. I'm gonna read this part to you. I don't know how long I'm gonna keep reading it. It's in the middle of the chapter I'm gonna start. I was like, should I start at the beginning of the chapter? I was like, no, this is a for me video. This is not a for you video. So we're starting where I feel like starting, which maybe that says something about the beginning of this chapter. Maybe it wasn't as strong. You know what? I'm learning. We're all learning here. If you just hate spoilers, or you don't like starting stories in the middle of stories, which, yeah, that's fair, or you don't want to hear me read it, like, there's a lot of reasons you can go ahead and click away. But if you're interested, then you know what? Stay tuned. Now, I'm not gonna tell you anything about the story and the millions of things that lead up and like what the characters are doing. No, we're just gonna enjoy this section of the story that I enjoy, so that maybe Circuit will just like go to sleep for the summer and let me really work on moon painting, which I'm just gonna have another self-indulgent dive into and just really make that story only for me, something only teenage me would love. You know, we're having a selfish year because so much is going on right now. Sometimes I just need to focus on me. Anyway, without further ado, this is from what page is this? Page 62 of Circuit. From the first turn where the wretched stench began, she pulled the front of her shirt up over her nose and held it in place with her hand, wishing she'd brought her tool belt with the extra thick dusk masks in it. Holding her breath, she charged forward, eyes watering. At each bend, she had to blink to see and follow On's short, disjointed directions. The stench seemed to be a visceral part of the air, and it was either making her dizzy from holding her breath or blurring her vision like smoke. The leaves around her stopped being green as they went further. They were curling and cracked as though the odor was killing them. Rowan kept her free hand out, running her fingers along the crackling, sharp leaves to keep from running into them. She was dizzy and thought about just turning back when a low sound burbled up, freezing her in place as it shook through her bones, reverberating against her sternum. She drew her hands up so they could protect her ears. Whatever made the noise had to be where the path now appeared to break into the clearing, some 12 feet ahead of her. Every nerve screamed at her to turn and run. On pointed excitedly down the path, and when she shook her head at him, he nodded and flickered away. She blinked the sting out of her eyes and reminded herself that she could sit down and refuse to go any further, or she could turn around and run back the way she came, or that she could have just stayed home today and never been mixed up in all this at all. But she was already here. Both hands went back to her nose and she gasped against her shirt to try and block out the smell. Whatever was ahead of her was wheezing. Leaves cracked and fell to the ground against the current of air that rushed down the path. Her hair ruffled, and the chill that shot through her left her rigid and nauseated. Her stomach wrenched in dry heaves. Even worse, she was becoming increasingly aware of the skin on her face and arms that had been exposed to the fire. It was becoming tight and hot all over again. On was nowhere to be seen. She stumbled down the path, willing herself to keep going, and then she saw it. And it saw her. The thing inside the clearing was enormous. It rose 9 feet at its shoulders, eyes sunk deep into gaping caverns on a skull with horns so massive they weighed down its head, which was bigger than a cart horse. Clumps of skin were flaking off under brown, shaggy fur, and large chunks of rotted flesh barely clung to the skeleton around the head and shoulders. The flesh that lay about the creature's feet was greenish and wrinkling in decay. The claws on the ends of its massive limbs were as long as the prongs of a pitchfork and raked the ground. Its nostrils flared, and it let out another great, shaking bellow. It had seen her. Its huge, sunken eyes were fixed on hers, and it bellowed again. There was a rattle, the creaking of chains, then it lunged for her. Rowan tripped and nearly fell flat, she turned so fast. Before she could wipe the dirt from where it had lodged in her palm, she was upright and running, scrambling to put space between her and the creature. Chapter 13. Rowan didn't turn back to look. She ran flat out as far as she could through the twists and curves of the maze until she was panting and trembling. When she gasped for air, her lungs burned from the deprivation. The leaves around her were green again, and she stumbled a ways further, and by some miracle she'd chosen the right path. There were Mariah and Zet and Remy waiting for her. The two awake looked at her in alarm. "Miss Rowe, are you okay?" Zet's small voice asked. She couldn't hold her stomach any longer and vomited into the nearest hedge. Her ears were ringing. When she managed to stumble away and felt stable again, On was beside her, coaxing her back towards the others. "We should... She let herself sit down heavily beside Remy's body and focused on breathing in clean, fresh air for a few moments. Her lungs were burning, along with her nose and throat and arms and face. She wiped her forehead on her shirt, then took her boots, stripped off her socks, and laid them on the grass to dry. "What is it? What's wrong?" Zet asked, full concern knit between his enormous eyes. "Are you sick?" It was easy enough to ignore the questioning faces of the magicians around her. They had become the background noise of the entire day. If she sat here where there was no foul odor, she could probably convince herself that she'd never seen the horrible thing, as long as she focused on the leaves and didn't close her eyes. Perhaps she could avoid ever having to see it again and wake up suddenly at home, and none of this would have been real. Her stomach turned again, and she lay down on the grass. The monster. He'd be one of them then. They hadn't run into anything or anyone that wasn't one of them. And the one they were missing, the one who controlled the wind with the long braid, it could be him. She looked up to see Mariah's stony head bent over her and Zet leaning in from the side. If she turned, On was crouched beside her, occasionally opaque enough to make out. "There's a monster," she whispered. Zet let out a tiny squeal, and then she turned back to look. He yelled again, and her heart jumped. Remy was standing just beyond her feet, cloak slipped to his knees. He lashed out with both arms at Zet, who tumbled on his back and looked up with wide, frightened eyes. Rowan launched herself from the ground, shoulders first at Remy's midsection, knocking him back. The cloak slipped away entirely, and he kicked at her, yelled, struggled to reach for Zet again, who screamed. Looping her arms under his and giving a great tug, she pulled him out of range of Zet, but he flipped on her, kneeing her in the face. The pain shot through her skull, straight down her back. He wriggled out from underneath her and screamed, spit flying from his lips. With the pain came the rage reawakening against him. Her face throbbed, and she grabbed again, pulling him bodily away. She struck him hard upside the face with the side of a closed fist. He kicked, this time into her chest, winding her enough to let him scramble away from her again. When she could draw in breath, She could see him running down the maze in the direction of the monster, fully naked. The cloak lay discarded on the ground. Alright, that's probably enough of my self-indulgent chapters. It's just fun. This section is just fun. I know there's a lot going on, but I enjoy it. I enjoy the part with the magicians in the maze so much. And I wonder if I should have just written the whole story to be in that maze, but at the same time, like, that's not what Circuit can be and what Circuit can do. And there's so many other scenes I love. There's one at the end that I love. I ended up loving the ending I wrote for this, and I think I'm the only one who's ever read it, but I loved the way I tied back the ending. I was really proud of that. Honestly, the one part that I'm most shaky about, there's like two parts. There's the part at the very beginning that I just feel like is not a good enough hook. And then there's a part right after the midpoint turn where I've got to info dump a lot. Like, you got to catch up. And I realize Rowan's so passive. She really needs to put in a little more effort a little bit earlier on, so I don't have to put so much information on you right there. But it's really, the midpoint turns the direction of the plot so far. You really need to do some catching up. And those are the two parts that I'm really, like, the most iffy about. But, like, this whole part in the maze I really love. And I really love the ending. And I love the scene with the fire. I love this story. And there are sections I wrote well that I feel like I wrote well. There are definitely sections where, like, girl, you gotta learn how to do a description. But this is just, I wanted to post something kind of fun for me. Hope you liked it. I hope you're having a good weekend, because I'm gonna post this on a Sunday. Yes, that's right. Are there parts of your books that you just, like, want to read, like your secret chapters, like your books that are they may never see the light of day, but you're still really proud of them? Are there, like, little parts that you really enjoy? Let me know in the comments down below. And yeah, I hope you're having a good weekend so far, and good luck to all of us. Bye!